Thank you guys for joining us tonight for our Singh-Ray webinar of the month. Tonight we are stepping up your game with the Silvermans, Susan and Neil Silverman. They're going to talk tonight about filters, the how, when, where, and why, and how to step up your game and really impress your friends. And by way of introduction, they are a husband and wife team who have taught and photographed together for over 20 years. They have been leading their own workshops for over 15 years and taught for Great American Photography workshops for betterphoto.com, Santa Fe School, PPA affiliates, PPC, B&H Photo, Pacific Northwest Art School, Walhalla Arts Center, and the Santa Rosa Junior College. Their work has appeared as the cover of Outdoor Photography in Elle magazine, Der Spiegel, Sierra Club, The Cure, the Autobahn, and Nikon World, and more. They photograph for the Santa Rosa Symphony, and they've embraced technology and the creative aspects of the digital cameras, and they love sharing the excitement and immediate satisfaction that they offer. They take digital cameras to a whole new level of excellence, and we're excited to have them here with us tonight.
Okay, thank you, Michelle, and welcome everybody. We're happy to have you join us and hope that we can share some of our knowledge and our inspiration and some of the tricks that we've learned with using our cameras and our filters with you. Is this volume loud enough, Michelle? Can you tell? Can you hear me?
I can hear you great. If anyone can't hear, let us know in the chat window.
Okay, fine. So first of all, we want to thank Singh-Ray and Michelle and Karen and everyone involved, the whole crew at Singh-Ray, because they have always provided us, but everybody with great products, and their support is amazing. I mean, anybody who's dealt with the office knows that they have a great support team. They're always available and always ready to answer any questions or any situations that you have come up. So we really appreciate working with them. And we've used filters. Neil and I have been photographing since the old film days. I hate to say old, but it's true, with slides and films. And we started with filters back then. And there are a lot of filters on the market, but we have just found Singh-Ray to be consistently the best quality and the best ones to use, because when you buy, you've invested a lot of money, as you all know, in your camera and your lenses, and you want to put a good filter on that lens. You don't want any color contrast or any type of tonal problems being introduced because of a filter. And we use our filters for many different reasons. We're going to touch on the ones that we use predominantly, and hopefully give you some ideas of things that you can do to make your photos all the more interesting. And you know, we're always looking for a different way to shoot a certain scene, or to be able to get re-inspired, for any of you who've been photographing for a long time, to become able to just get some more excitement and interest into your images. So the first thing that we want to do is talk about what we consider 6 elements. Neil and I do a lot of judging of photo contests and for other art galleries. We judge, and the thing that we immediately know when we look at an image is that there are 6 elements that we consider really important to give you that great photo. First one, of course, is the subject, and that is an apparent subject, something for the viewer's eye to go to immediately, so that you don't just look like you've got a tossed salad on your screen or in the thing that you've printed, the paper you've printed. So the first thing to have, that you really need to realize, what is the subject of whatever it is you're photographing, whether it's a landscape, people photography, an event. You really want a subject. How is the lighting? Is the lighting good? We all know photography is about the lights, and that's what's really important. How are the background and the edges? They can dominate your image and derail it and make it not as good as it can be if you've got bad background and bad edges. The conditions are important. If you're photographing flowers, are they all fresh? Are they bug eaten? Do you have a lot of out of focus leaves in your image that's going to degrade it terribly? The dynamic range, which most of you know what that is, but in case you don't, we always call that the exposure. You know, it's really important that you have detail, and this is where the filters can really come in and make a big part of your image successful. Do you have detail in most all of the elements of your photo? in the dark areas and in the light areas. And then your perspective. And that's what everybody wants, to find their own little niche, their own way of being able to say that somebody recognize and say, you know, I know you shot that because you've got a different way of viewing it and shooting it than someone else did.
And so the filters can affect the subject in a way that you want to emphasize the subject. In lighting, obviously, to try to even out lighting where you have problems, and that's the dynamic range as well. And it can also cause problems with background and edges, and especially with the edges, if you start getting vignetting or darkening on the edges. And those are some of the little things that we'll talk about later.
So these are what we consider to be your basic ABCs of getting a great image. If you've got all of this covered really well, you're going to have an image that you're going to be happy with, and not one that you're going to want to delete. So filters are not always easy. Sometimes you have to think, gee, do I really want to use that filter? So why? Why do you want to bother with them? So we have what we consider good impetus to make us really want to use our filters. First of all, if you're able to create your exposure and capture it through the camera, as I said, we like to do it. I believe I said it. We like to get our photos in the camera rather than try to fix them on the computer. We do relatively lot amount of Photoshop and Lightroom and other editing programs, but we do it for creativity, not to try and fix something. So our point of view is get it right in the camera, and you'll have less time at the computer. These filters very often will help you get the shot in the camera rather than having to come back and sit down at the computer. And you know, with landscape, the reason we take up photography is so we could be wherever we want to be taking the picture, not home sitting at a computer. So it'll expand your time outdoors or wherever you are and less time indoors.
But the other thing is, you know, you got the shot at the time. You know you got a winner. And the other way, you're going home and hoping that you can salvage the image to do that.
And so you have less time period. And you know, if you get a filter on and it really looks great on the back of your screen, it's going to encourage you to keep shooting. You're going to stay there instead of thinking, oh, this isn't working out, maybe I'll move somewhere else. It's going to encourage you to keep shooting. And it's also going to help slow you down. And I know that most of us, anybody who shot pre-digital, we all took time and we really composed our image. And then we maybe percentage wise had more keepers because you were slowed down. You took your time. You knew you had just so many shots on a roll of film or on your slide roll. And so this way, when you're slowed down a bit because you're using the filter and you're thinking about your composition a little bit more, it's going to just give you much better results. We feel that you'll really get a lot more better results than you would without it if you were just clicking away. Your drama is going to increase. You're going to increase in drama. You'll see with the skies and the clouds and a lot of things that happen within greenery that just punches up everything really well. Your dynamic range, balance of dynamic range, that's where we're talking about the exposure. You're going to have your lights and your darks come within a range. You know, our eyes can see everything. When we look at a scene, our eyes can see detail in the dark and light areas, but the camera can't. Haven't proven as good as the human eyeball yet. So you're going to have those areas where there is no detail, but if you use these filters and you can use them in the correct way, very often you're going to get a lot more detail in your dark and light areas. So you're going to have more interest and more information and data within your photo scene. And no telltale HDR results. Well, have you ever looked at a picture and thought, oh, that's HDR. Somebody did HDR with that. You know, sometimes people can overuse it. It can be very good when you take an HDR image. For those of you who might not know, is the camera you would take, for example, just to be minimal, 3 exposures, an underexposed, overexposed, and a correctly exposed image. And then you would put them together in the computer. Some cameras do it, but if we do any HDR, we do it within the computer. And sometimes these can just look fake. And it just doesn't, it's not as successful. But you hardly ever have anybody say, oh, they must have used a filter on that, a neutral density filter. So it's really, it's just much more natural, and it gives you a much more true image for what you saw at the time. We talk about emphasizing the foreground, and this is particularly important with the scenic and the grand scenic that you're looking at. If you have a foreground object, something for the eye to go into and see, and then you have interest throughout the image, your viewer is going to really enjoy it. You're going to enjoy that photo a lot more. So we always try to get a foreground image, whether it's a rock. Here in this image, you see the Moki rocks right here on the lower right. There's something to pull your eye in and then take you back throughout the scene. But if you have no detail in the foreground, because say the background is so much brighter that the camera doesn't pick up the detail in the foreground, then you're going to have something that's not as happy. You're not going to be as happy with it. It's not going to be as successful. So it really helps you to get a balance and to get everything much more interest throughout the whole photo. The filters can reduce reflections. We're going to show examples of that. And your sunsets and waterfalls, you can get some of the most beautiful of each type of situation when you use filters with them. And we use it to control motion and removing people or cars in the scene. So you go.
Well, oftentimes you're traveling, for instance, and you're in front of an icon building and you're trying to get the architecture, but people are in your way. And if you can take a longer exposure where the people don't show in the scene, it's a real plus. Because
they're moving and they've moved out of the scene. So we're going to start out talking about the polarizer. We tend to like water that's a little ethereal and on the soft side. We do take plenty of pictures where the droplets are frozen, everything's frozen. But this is something that we really enjoy and we try to achieve with a lot of our water photographs. So when you're using a polarizer, the best time to think about using it is when the sun is at a right angle to the camera, and that's for clouds and skies. So if you're trying to pop up those white clouds or make the skies look great, that's the best time to really use that polarizer. Polarizer can also help cut through the haze in the air. Sometimes you can get out, you can be there for the sunrise. It's beautiful, but everything looks a little smazy or hazy. You know, if you put that polarizer on, very often you can cut through that haze. So it's really worthwhile to try it if you're in that kind of a situation. You can remove your shine and reflection from leaves, glass, water, metals, anything. And we're going to show you some examples of that too. And we talked about bringing the dynamic range together, getting your exposure more within what the camera can handle, adding contrast. You know, isn't that the old classic thing? If somebody looks at a photo and says, well, you should add more, can you add more contrast? I mean, we all want a little bit more extra contrast very often in our photos, just to give it that little extra punch and pizzazz. And the filters can help you do that. And we talk about slowing shutter by choice. You know, you don't want to slow shutter speed if it's not the situation where you're in control and it's something that you want. That's something that the filters can help you do it. We enjoy panning, especially if we travel. And it's always fun to get some panning shots, which we'll talk about the technique in just a minute. But the polarizer can help you if it's really bright and it's too bright to be able to be successful, the light around you. With your panning, the polarizer can help bring it down so that you're successful.
An intentional movement for creative effects is something that we just love to do, and we will get into that in just a minute.
So this is for a have and have not photo. Nothing particularly artistic about this, but look at the change just on the asphalt, just from having the polarizer. And I'm going to say right off, our polarizers, our filters are all the Singh-Ray. And we personally lean towards the warming. That's just what we like. So our polarizers are circular and they're the warming polarizers. But here you have the non-polarized, and here you have the mountain that's brought out in the sky to give you some interest, just to see the difference in the two. Here we've removed the reflection from the water.
And the reflection from the leaves.
And from the leaves
and the
too.
Color that's brought out by doing that.
Even the moss or the little leaves on the rock in the background. This is more subtle, but you can see the difference. Take a look at the ferns and even the brown of the redwoods. And you see how it's taken the glare off of that. And the only difference between these two is with and without the polarizer. So these are petroglyphs. And
So when if you want to go back one slide, do you lose one stop using a polarizer on a digital camera?
Yeah, you're going to lose some light because it's a dark piece of glass going in front.
Right.
And the Sing-Rays are known for reducing less of the amount of light than most other polarizers, especially on their new series, their LB series and all.
so you do lose light, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. Things to be careful of when you're using all these filters. So yes, that is something. Here you see these petroglyphs, and the image without the polarizer, you can hardly see them. And on the right, all we did was put the polarizer on and see how they popped out on the rocks. Here, not only the sky changes, but the Tom's sign becomes much more vivid and apparent, and it just really pops that image up much more successful. And this, it was a kind of a moist morning, a little dewy and post rainy out there, and the greens came out because we were using our polarizer. Again, a situation where the polarizer, you might not think you would use it because there's that much sky, but it just helped to bring all those colors much more vividly out. This is in the Palouse in Eastern Washington. And again, these greens popped. It was a moist area, but everything came really vivid because of we used the polarizer.
So in the past, polarizers could fool the meter. Do the Sing-Ray filters do that as well?
No, the meter absolutely can tell everything that's going on in front.
Okay.
No problem whatsoever. This is one of my favorite photos that Susan's done. This was up in Washington State, and just the extra little bit of contrast and warmth that she got from using that polarizer really helped make this and put it together.
We, as I said, we like our water silky, and there you have it. We use this polarizer to soften this water. So we also sometimes we like to have a really slow shutter speed in addition to when we're using it with water shots. So this helped, not only using the polarizer to kind of make those reds pop out, but we were able to capture the sense of movement of this truck in front of this gentleman who fortunately stood still enough for us.
So relative movement is something that really makes for a lot of interest. And here you have it also. And you have to pick a shutter speed that'll let you see that those spools are spools. You couldn't even tell what it would be if it was just one big blur. So here you have the nice part of this is also that one of them is still that she's working on, but you can see the motion, the relative motion in her hands. And then the next slide is a relative motion just in the hay bale as he's moving, and you have to get the right shutter speed. So there is some experimentation when you're taking a picture like this. Go ahead.
So we also love to slow our speed for creative, intentional camera movement. And this is kind of not a very attractive forest scene. On the left, you see the highway orange pole in the foreground, and not something that's really caught our eye, but we intentionally move our camera. And so we have the polarizer on and we move the camera
up and down, up and down, or up or down, or it could be the combination of up and down. But the point of this in a way is that this was at a workshop and we're driving by and it wasn't good weather. It was horrible light and there was not a whole lot of wildlife or anything going on. And so we just took a couple moments to work on creativity. And sometimes you can make things happen where there was nothing happening.
Another similar situation. We like these painterly effects too. And it's fun to have something like this in addition to what would be the classic forest shot. And again, this was camera movement with the polarizer.
And sometimes you can do these if the light is not real bright. Sometimes you can get down to a shutter speed of say a quarter second. But most of the time we need either some neutral density to help slow it down or a polarizer. And the easiest way when it can handle it is just to use a polarizer so that you get a little bit of darkening of what the light coming in, and it slows down your shutter speed.
Go ahead. this is panning. So we were talking about panning. We said we'd talk about it a minute ago. So this is panning. We had our polarizer on. And what we do with this is, why don't you go ahead?
Well, I'm moving the camera at the same speed as the subject that I want to try to get sharp. And I'm moving along at the same rate as the bicycle is going. And you don't click and stop, but what you do is you're moving your camera and you click and keep going. It would be the same as if you were shooting skeet and you don't stop when you click the shot off, you just keep following through.
Yes.
So in tennis, you follow through.
Like tennis,
After you hit the ball, it's the same type
golf,
of thing.
after you've hit the ball, the follow through. So that follow through is really important when you pan in order to be successful. Otherwise, it just looks like it doesn't come out, you as an image you really like. But the polarizer can help you slow the motion down so that you can get these. And the trick with panning is you want your foreground and your background to be soft, out of focus, but something sharp, so that when the viewer or you look at that, you can see something sharp and recognize something that makes sense to you. And then you get the real sense of this is a movement.
And here in
on.
Vietnam, there was so much activity going that you're actually getting the person going in the other direction to blur as well, which I think made it even more interesting.
It was fun. So we also want to talk about the gold and blue polarizer. And this is not one that we use all the time, but every once in a while you pull it out and it's really fun. And it just can give you a little bit more spark of imagination and creation and inspiration. So it's one, and you do not have to use it full blue or full gold. You can, what's the right word? You can
Just
turn it so that you get partial of whatever you want. So you don't have to use it full on. So this is where you see in the center is what the scene really looked like. And on the left, we use the gold part of the polarizer, and on the right, we use the blue. Here's another example of the same thing. So as you can see, it gives you a whole different outlook, but sometimes these are great. And this is something that you really.
And then you have choices when you go home.
Right.
When you guys are shooting, is there a standard ISO that you like to use or start with?
The lowest one possible, but that's a great question. The lowest one that you can still get the shutter speed that you need.
And the most important thing we always tell people, no, when you are shooting, be aware of your shutter speed. And that's the one thing that people tend to overlook and not think about. We personally shoot an aperture priority. So we're always conscious of our aperture priority. And so people tend to do that and think that way and then forget about the shutter speed. But the shutter speed is one of the most important things that you want to think about before you push the shutter. Do you want to talk about?
Well, the shutter speed is going to affect anything that's moving for sure. But what happens most of the time is the photographer is moving a little bit as they push the shutter release button down, and they get photos that when they look good on the back of their camera, when they go home and get on the computer, they're not as sharp as they want. So we're constantly answering questions at workshops and lecturing about shutter speed. And there is a formula that you can all look up on the internet, but it's basically 1 over the number of millimeters of the lens for hand holding to get a sharp photo. But that's only if you have very, very skillful hands that don't move, shake, tremor, or anything. And you'd have to have a good stance, a good holding of your camera, a really rock solid everything, as close to a tripod as you can get, but your hand holding. And if people get a little relaxed, then that doesn't happen and you don't get the sharpness.
Or if you've had that second cup of coffee, why don't you give another example with that?
Well, I'm definitely the one that doesn't stay steady with a cup of coffee.
But here again, this, the scene on the left is without, and on the right is with the gold blue polarizer.
So this is in Catter, and the architecture is quite unusual, but I love what the gold blue did with these colors. I just love it here.
So now we're going to talk a little bit more about the neutral density.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I just want to touch on shutter speed real quick. When you guys were talking about that, for panning, would you use the lowest shutter speed, or does that equation still hold true?
You know, for panning, it's all got to do with how fast the subject is moving.
Ah,
And people can look this up, but there are formula charts for it. And the chart will have somebody walking, somebody jogging, somebody running, a horse moving fast, slow, a car moving fast, slow. They all require a different shutter speed to get what you'd like. But I find the most frequent ones that we use tend to be around a 15th of a second, a 10th of a second, a 30th of a second, somewhere between a 10 and a 30th of a second for most things that aren't like going really fast or a racing car, that type of thing. I
okay.
hope that helps.
Thank you.
Okay, so we want to talk about the neutral density, the graduated neutral and the full neutral density. First of all, again, the graduated can help control your dynamic range. We talked about getting your exposure that's more universal for that particular image so that it works well for you. Brings out the detail. Again, these are great. You need a graduated neutral density. If you're photographing a landscape and you've got something in the foreground and there's a bright background, you need that neutral density filter to be able to bring out the accent and the importance of the foreground object.
And the next one is that you can use a partial corner freehand. And we're going to show you an example of that in just a minute. But sometimes there's just one little area that's too bright and it isn't across the entire image. And you can actually just hold a corner of the neutral density and move it a little bit if you'd like. That's the way I like to do it, so I don't get any sharp delineation of where it was. And that'll hold back that bright area and just let the whole picture come to fruition.
Sunsets and sunrises, and we're going to show you some of those too and tell you how those are so important to have that neutral density with you. The full neutral density, again, for panning in bright light, if you enjoy that panning or you're inspired to try it, the full neutral density is what will really help you get successful images. You can slow down your water, your clouds, people moving, as we said. You can even have people move not appear in a scenic scene, a city scene. If you're able to use that neutral, full neutral density filter, you can eliminate the people, so to speak. So, and what this will do, what these do is they extend your midday. Most of us know about the golden light, which is early in the morning, sunrise time, sunset time, but you can shoot sometimes into the midday too. If you're able to use these filters and you have them as part of your toolbox, you can shoot longer because you're able to control the light more. So it gives you more time to be able to be out with your camera rather than saying, oh, I wish I'd been here and when it was earlier or later. Sometimes you can extend your shooting time a lot more. And the full neutral density definitely adds moods to your images. So you want to get a little bit more mood, ambiance in your images, the full neutral density.
You know, on this picture here on the right, you not only have a little bit of a mood that's created from using it, but not having it on there, you would never have the reflections as strong as they are here. So sometimes when you smooth out the water, you can increase the ability to see those reflections. I know there's some wonderful pictures at Yosemite, at Yellowstone, at a lot of the national parks where that's really true. This is a Laguna area near where we live. And if there's a ripple in the water, you will not see that kind of reflection. And it really can add strength to your pictures. So here's a split neutral density, a soft neutral density filter. We're just holding it up only so that you can see where it affects the sky and how. And here it is in place for the photograph.
Same here.
So one of the things, we are aperture shooters pretty much, but this is a time when I like to go into manual exposure and take a manual exposure on the foreground where I want it to stay pretty much the same, and then just put the neutral density soft graduated filter in and bring it down to where it affects the sky and not the foreground. If I need a little more in the foreground, I can bring it down just a little more. So here I brought it down just a little bit more. So the very bright tan area, beige area on the right still got to settle in a little more. And then the foreground stayed pretty much the same.
So this is done with a soft edge, right? Do you travel both with the hard and the soft edge usually?
Yes, absolutely.
And what strengths? I'm not sure I understand the question. Maybe they need to clarify.
The strengths, well, the ones that we use the most are the 2-stop and the 3-stop. But sometimes you need to combine both and sandwich them together. And with the quality of the Singh-Ray filters, you can actually do that and still come up with a really exquisite image. A 1-stop is a nice thing to have some of the time. You get to use that, where just that little subtle difference makes the picture and you nailed it right on the spot.
Again, this is with the 3-stop neutral density. And if you notice in the image, the lower right image, you see the ocean in the foreground. This is a river, it goes into the ocean. And the top, it was so washed out and overexposed that you didn't even realize there was an ocean there. So it really helps bring out the detail where you want it. Again, these are more examples of how we've used it. We really use our grads a lot. And this, you know, this image, had we not been able to capture all the layers of detail and interest within it, it could have been just a big kind of boring photo. But this way you've got your layers and you've got something to pull your eye further and further throughout the image, take you through the whole situation.
Oh,
Now,
here's the place.
The
Yep.
filters, someone wants to know if they're glass or plastic or acrylic.
There are some composite resin, but I don't really know scientifically.
I didn't know if you wanted to take that one. So yeah, some of them are made of glass and some of them are made of resin. And I know the ones that are made of resin, I think it was invented for the spaceship or something like that, something crazy. So
Yeah, and here, this is a resin type filter, and I'm taking the corner and just moving it right into that
Your hand in
area.
front of them.
So my hand is just moving up and down, maybe up and down and circular during this exposure. And of course, the longer the exposure, the more control you can have over that. But if I didn't do that, the bright area, the bright orange area at the top would just be blown out completely with no detail whatsoever. So this could not be, there's just no way to have made this unless you did a whole bunch of bracketed exposures, did a lot of time in Photoshop trying to bring them together, and then you still don't know if you nailed it or not. But here, right when you do it, you're done.
You know you've got it. And the full neutral, this is a friend of ours. Tell them about Phil.
Well, this is Phil Lewenthal, who lives in Northern California and who was on the coast photographing with a polarizer and trying to get slow water and doing quite well at it, actually. However, I loaned him a 10-stop Singh-Ray neutrodensity, more slow neutrodensity filter. And I could not believe that within a couple days of using that filter, he could come up with this quality of a picture with no experience with the nutrodensities at all. It just really spoke to me about what this whole thing is about, to see somebody come through that fast and have that kind of control. So it isn't like you have to have a master's degree in photography to be able to take these pictures. You need good equipment and this kind of quality filter. And he was pretty much self-taught himself in a couple of days. But I'm showing you this because I didn't take the picture, but somebody new to it could do it that fast. I think it was amazing.
And again, here's what you can do with your water with the variable nutrodensity. So you can have your crisp crashing waves on the left or more of the soft that we go for. So this way, you know, you're in a situation you can use both with and without the filter, and you go home and you have your choice. You have for whatever the mood is that you want to portray. And this is a good sense of what the variable neutral, we have a little, should I go on to the next? Do you want to talk about this?
So the variable has the polarizer in there, as well as, at least ours, we have the dual that has the polarizer in it, and it has the nutrodensity, so you can do them independently, control them independently. You can turn both rings and get the amount of polarization you want, and then take the outer ring and just put in how much nutrodensity you want, anywhere from a little over 2 stops to 8 stops of nutrodensity, and it's all in one little package.
Here, I'm going to show you. This is, you have to start it down below, I think. Here we go.
So just turning it you can see that you can get different densities, and you can just choose the amount of density that you want, and that helps you get the shutter speed that you want.
Again, this is in Virginia, and this variable neutral gave us the sense that we wanted with this waterfalls in this river. And here it is. This is a very small pond, small falls near us, but after the rains, and we again, this is something we liked, the warming brought out the warmth in it, and it just controlled the water to what we wanted to do. Now we want to talk to you a little bit about the reverse neutral density. I don't know if many of you are familiar with this, but if you are someone who enjoys sunsets and sunrise, this is a great filter to have in your toolbox.
And you
We
can
have
see
a
it.
really, sorry, can we go back to the variable ND? We have a really good question.
Yeah.
To the what?
Variable.
Variable ND. So someone said the lines on the variable ND are not calibrated according to the stops. So I find the setting of the exposure challenging. How do you determine how many stops have been set when you turn the filter?
Well, that's a good question, and experience helps for one thing. Some people put marks on it, and they either can take a little tape and put a little triangle of tape in different places, or take a pen and mark it. I
Right.
don't do that, but I know that when I'm all the way to the left, or however you're looking at your angulation, I know that I can see through it, and I'm at the minimum amount, and then I go toward the max, and as I'm going, I really am looking for what's going to get me the shutter speed that I want. So I don't really care if I'm at 2.7 stops or 3.5 stops. I'm really trying to get the effect that I want. So I don't maybe make it that scientific. I think it's more of a creative tool if you want to make it that way. And some people that use, say, a 10 stop on everything, and they always do the exact same numbers and everything, maybe all the pictures start looking alike too. So you can get silky texture, you can get a milky texture, you can get something with more texture. All those different things are all in your bag of tricks when you have these things. And I think you don't have to know the exact number.
Right. And there are lines, I just wanted to clarify, there are marks on the filter.
Absolutely.
But they're there as reference points. So like you said, you have
Yes.
really good tips for working around that.
Very good. And when I go to get the exposure, I can take the exposure without that in place. And then when I put it in place, I can see how it's affecting my meter from the plus to the minus. And then I can try to balance that out to get a proper exposure. I will say that if you do the regular math and figure out how to change your shutter speed by how many stops, I usually have to give it more exposure in the end. If I do the exact math from a 60th to a 30th to a 15th or whatever, the more I have to change that, the more I'm going to do overexposure in the end. And I believe that Singh-Ray has a chart that probably is still available. I remember seeing it years ago, where they actually had examples of those exposures and how much to overexpose.
So
Okay.
do you have tips for long exposures using the very ND? By being off by more than one stop makes a really meaningful difference in exposure. So do you have tips as far as the long exposures go?
My biggest tip would be to overexpose more than underexpose when you're trying to get that first picture to see where you're at.
Yeah.
And there is some experimentation. But you know, it really is fun that when you change your shutter speed, maybe you're doing a waterfall and you're at a quarter second, a third of a second, a half second, and to see those differences in the texture or the silkiness. I mean, sometimes you'll take 3-4 pictures, not because you need that to get one good one, but because when you go home, you've got these different textural differences to have choices.
Right.
And sometimes those choices have different places of use too. And some people really see things only, they don't want that abstract look. They really want to see it, but there's no one picture that makes a waterfall look exactly like your eye saw it. So everything is a little bit abstract.
Okay, so now we want to talk about the reverse neutral density. And this gives you an idea of what it looks like. And this was done at a sunset area, and the reverse neutral density, go back.
So in the dark portion that you see, it's not dark at the top going toward lighter and then to clear. This is actually dark at the place where you'd put it, where the sun is the brightest, or where the sky is the brightest, or whatever thing is really bright. And when you go to if you took a plain regular soft or hard grad, it wouldn't have that ability to have the darker area right where you need it. And so this invention is really something. These are the Darrell Benson Singh-Ray reverse grads. And in terms of number, I think the 3 is the 3 stops probably a good place to be at.
So as you can see, the bright area is really down right at the horizon where the sun is setting, but this holds interest throughout the image. Same here.
And I think this was one of the first times I mean, this is really old. This was done with film. And I remember there were a bunch of us all standing at a viewpoint, taking a picture of this. If you have the reverse and there's 10 other people there and they don't have the reverse, no one can get that detail in the foreground and still have the sky look right. And it was just, I mean, this is really a long time ago, but I was so sold after this on the reverse. I can't tell you, it was just an amazing change in the way I saw photography from then on.
So Paul said he has a challenge with the reverse grad causing too much darkness in the horizon. Are my horizons just not flat enough? Do you have ideas or help?
Maybe need less, you know, a 2-stop instead of a 3-stop, or maybe just to move it a little bit, either up or down to get what you need. Now, one of the things I do, so I don't know how okay this is with some of you, but I hand hold my filters when they're rectangular filters, and I move it up and down just a little bit during the exposure. Because most of these things are slower exposures when you're at sunset, sunrise, that type of thing. It's not the middle of the day when you're doing that. And it's long enough to just give it a little tiny move up and down with the filter. Now you have to be careful not to move your lens or your camera when you do it, but I'm usually on a tripod when I'm doing that. And so movement has not ever been a problem with that. You have to be a little careful not to scratch the filters, but the overall result doesn't show a big delineation. And if I was a little too dark in one area, I can move it so that I don't have that happen. I hope that helps.
Okay, so we want to talk about using multiple filters because we do not just stick with one all the time. So in this situation, we had both the soft neutral density, the grad, and the warming circular polarizer. And again, here we had the 2-stop grad and the more slow. So this was one, and this one we wanted to show you this image to give you an idea. Sometimes when you're going to convert and you've taken a picture, maybe you're thinking, oh, maybe I'll turn that into a black and white, or you get home and you think I'll turn it into a black and white. If you've used any filter, sometimes, and we can't give you a scientific reason of how or why it works, but you get more contrast and you get just a more ability to create a much stronger black and white as your end product.
And I think
isn't the right word,
I think it's also true with the gold blue. I've seen some of the conversions that the gold blue is used on, and the black and whites just really snap, and they're absolutely beautiful.
So when you're working with a rectangular filter, especially when you're moving it, are you just in front of the lens or are you directly against the lens? How do you hold it?
It has to be, it's a good question, it really is. It has to be flat right against it. If there's any angulation, you're going to get a distortion in the picture. So it has to be flat against it and just up and down sliding right against the lens. Very good question.
Okay, so here we had both the grad and the polarizer. Same. And the UV filters, now to be honest, we tend not to walk around with our UV filters on because we have a comfort zone that our lens shade and our lens hood that we always leave on gives us the first line of protection for any kind of traumatic drama that might happen with our camera or our lens. But there are times when we do use the Hilux, the Singh-Ray Hilux, which common street language is the UV filter. And the Singh-Ray are the best. Sometimes people will buy a camera or they get their lens and they buy just an inexpensive UV filter because it's cheap and you think, oh, well, it's just going to protect my lens. But you know, when you stop and realize how much money you've spent on that lens and how many physicists or engineers have created that lens with how many areas of high quality glass to make that lens sharp and to have your camera record a sharp image, then you really don't want to put an inexpensive filter on top of it. So it's something that although people think, oh, it's not that important, it is. It's really important, and it's going to prevent a lot of disappointment that you might have with your images.
So some of the places we use it are when we're doing commercial work. We do some in the shipyards and the welding's going on. And the one lens that I used without a filter because it couldn't take it was like a 14 with a big bulbous glass on it. And there's nothing really that can go right against that. And don't you think a spark hit it and put a little nick in it? So those things can happen. And those are times when you want to use a protective filter. Sometimes you're taking a picture of a pet and they want to lick your lens. That's a good time to have it. And a dirt bike throwing up a bunch of mud toward the lens, that would be a good time. And sometimes I'm sorry. And sometimes I thought the girls were in there, I'm sorry. Sometimes you just want a little bit of warmth, just a touch of warmth that you get with the Singh-Ray Hilux. And so we tend to like things a little warm, and so we can use it for that too, especially with portraits.
Okay, so we're going to have some thoughts now about challenges. We're not going to say problems, we're going to use the word challenges. Things to think about when you're using these filters. One thing that we are really strong about and strong-willed about is not to leave the polarizer on all the time, because you lose so much speed with your image when you're shooting. You're going to lose your stops of speed. That is just going to, if it's something you put your polarizer on and you thought, oh, I don't want to bother taking it off again, or you forget that it's on, the rest of the day when you didn't need it, you're going to be shooting much slower than you really would want to be. And it's very easy. We really promote using a filter pouch, because if you think, well, I want to use my polarizer, but I have to get it out of my camera bag. I have to take off my UV filter. I have to put the polarizer on, take the picture, take the polarizer off, put the UV back on, put the polarizer back in the camera bag. I mean, it's too much work. You don't want to be doing that. You're like a moving van all day long. You don't want to be doing that. So, but if you have a filter pouch that you carry, Neil carries his on his belt. I put mine on either on my backpack on the edge of it, or if I'm wearing a belt, I put it on. And it's very easy to take it out quickly. You're at a place, you're looking out and you think, gee, I think the polarizer might help. This might just punch it up a bit. Take the polarizer out, put it in front of your eye before you put it on the lens, and slowly turn it and see, does it really give you the effect that you're looking for? Because that's what's wonderful about the polarizer. What you see is what you get. And when you do, hold it up in front of your eyes, make sure that you have the threads towards your eye. So it's in the same situation it would be if it was on your lens. If you had it the other way, you're not going to see the effect. And you cannot don't wear sunglasses that are polarized when you're using it, because they're going to negate each other. It's not going to give you the true effect of what the polarizer is going to do for your photos. So you want to make sure you lift up your sunglasses if you're wearing them.
And one of the problems that can happen if you're ever putting one filter onto another filter, or even if it ever gets stuck onto your lens for any reason, it's nice just to have a rubber band or a couple different rubber bands, different sizes and thicknesses, where maybe you can get a purchase and get a grab to be able to take the filter off.
So it's something that we found that's just really been helpful to have with you. You can get vignetting. If you have double filters, if you have your polarizer and the UV on, you can end up with some vignetting, which is not, they can ruin many good shots.
And the vignetting is a darkening in the corners on your image.
And it's not pretty. It's not like an artistic vignetting. So it's something you really don't want unless you're putting it in intentionally. Wide angle lenses can vignette. And sometimes with the polarizer, you don't, maybe if you're at high altitudes and you're using almost a wide angle lens, you don't necessarily want it all the way polarized. You want to back it off a little bit to make your sky more even.
So actually that point that Susan just made is a really big one. Just because you've got a polarizer that can turn and it can polarize a lot, when you're going anything toward wide angle, you probably don't want to do it all the way because it gets uneven from one edge to the other edge going across.
Your sky.
So what
So,
wide,
and
what wide lens sizes are you guys typically using?
Anything from 14, 20, 24, 28,
12 to
35.
24.
I mean,
Yeah.
they're all have problems when you start stacking things in front.
Right. And then
And-
back to your sunglasses. Someone said, I assumed my polarized sunglasses are showing me what the polarizer will do. Is the axis of the camera polarizer different than my fixed polarized sunglasses?
Oh, well, it's a great question. We have some polarized sunglasses and we have others that aren't. And I have thought about that myself at different times, but somehow the polarization is different in those glasses, at least the ones we have, than what I see through the polarizer. And the color is different. Some are more of a brown, yellow type of thing. Some are more of a blue. I never was able to absolutely predict what it would do, but maybe somebody's got some that can do that better, but I just never found it to be true. So I really hate if I make a mistake and I have my polarized glasses on for some reason and I'm out there and I want to pick up a polarizer. I'm in trouble. I can't really tell what's going on.
we always take our sunglasses off when we're out shooting like that.
Right.
Step-up rings, you're going to hear people talk about them, and step-up rings are a nice thing to have because you can buy a filter that's perhaps larger than one lens you have. You buy a step-up ring, so then that filter will fit that lens. But again, this is one of those things that you think, oh, it's just a step-up ring. It's not that important. I can just buy an inexpensive one. The quality is really important. These are very fragile and they can get bent just a little bit, and then they can get stuck on your lens.
The threads will strip easy, but once they get stuck on there, it's a real bear. And if you're on a vacation, sometimes you can't use the filters anymore for the whole rest of the trip, or they're locked on to your lens for the whole rest of the trip. So you're shooting 2 or 4 times slower on the whole trip just because it's all stuck on there.
So we just really caution you to be sure you get good quality if you're going to go with a step-up ring.
Yeah. I mean, I know there's some things on YouTube that I've been shown where somebody will say, oh, you can buy these things for $1 or $2, but I don't think you want that one to put your polarizer on.
Well, and Singh-Ray has some step-up rings that they recommend that are available on singray.com as well.
Yeah, I think they have some Bowers and they're much better quality than the thing that would be $1.
Right.
And also talk about the eyepiece with the neutral density. And we're going to show you some examples in a minute.
Well, when you're using a full neutral density filter on your lens, you'll want to always cover the eyepiece. Some cameras have something that where you just flip it, click it, and it'll close the eyepiece. Otherwise, you want to put a piece of tape on there or stand so close to it that no light can get in. And then you also, to keep light leaks from coming in, should cover your lens with some type of a cloth that'll help keep light leaks out as well. And then the swatching for lens flare, we're going to go into that in just 1 minute. So, or less than a minute. But here's the sun coming into the lens and causing all kinds of problems with taking a picture with it. A lens hood or lens shade can reduce that, but if the sun gets low enough in the horizon, even that needs to have the sun blocked to take a good picture. So here's the, on the left, you can see there's actually a flare going into the lens. And then Susan is just helping this gentleman by holding her hat to keep it. And you can see now the flare is gone and he can take a really good picture. And here's lens flare on the left. If you didn't see the picture on the right, it might look okay to you, but this is just putting a lens hood on. And sometimes when you're using some of these filters, you won't be able to use your lens hood or your lens shade. They may not fit on over a certain polarizers, or when you're using a soft or a hard grad, you'll have the same type of problem. You can't just put a lens shade on and do that because you've got to have it against the lens, not in front of the lens shade. So you either have to block it with your hand, a hat, or somebody coming by to say, would you please just block the light for a second? But when it makes these kinds of differences,
it's really important. So on the left, you see this, what we always call the circle of confusion, flare coming into the lens, but it's more than that. Not only getting rid of those, but look at the difference in the saturation on the right of the foreground and the background. So it's really important to be aware of that. And the flare can come not only from a sun coming in, it can come from reflections from the water, from cement, from leaves. So those reflections can always come up and fool you and just dilute what you wanted.
and here on the left, you'll see where light leaked in through the viewfinder, because I didn't always know that you had to close the viewfinder. And so here you can see light leaking in through the viewfinder, and here it is with the viewfinder closed. I mean, it is such a dramatic difference when the sun really gets into the viewfinder there.
Okay, so thank you. And we're happy to take any questions that anybody might have, and hopefully we can answer them. And we
Yeah, I've
thank
been
you for
holding back a
listening.
few of them. You had a seascape that was roughly a 2-to-1 pano. Do you advocate that ratio? This is pretty early on.
Well, I have never thought about the ratio when I'm doing a pano.
No.
When I do a pano, the way I do it is pretty much to find the middle of what I want in the composition, and then start maybe on the left and keep taking pictures till I go over to the right. But I've never thought about it that way.
Can you flip the graduated ND instead of just using the reverse ND?
Absolutely, we do that. And there are times where something in the foreground is brighter, and then we want to hold that back a little bit. So that works perfectly like doing that. And there are times when you can actually put two together, one with the darker portion on the bottom, one with the darker portion on the top, sandwich them, and find what kind of movement you need to do to get something in the middle area to show up better when you have a bright bottom and a bright top. So that is done, not frequently, but we do it. Yes, it's a good question. Really good.
And then to clarify what the filters are made of, I've got my Singh-Ray counterparts here. We use the highest quality optical glass compared to that used by NASA. So it's the glass that's comparable to NASA. And the resin filters are made from optical grade CR39 resin. So for the folks out there who know what that means.
Here's your reminder.
But that way I'm not remiss.
Family prayer.
Alexa, stop. So sorry.
She has that way about her, doesn't she?
It does. All right. So is light leak an issue when you use a mirrorless camera?
You know, I don't have the answer for that. I don't own a mirrorless camera, but I have heard that it's less of an issue, but I am no expert on that. I don't have my mirrorless yet. I think we're all going to have them in about 3 years. Probably that's all we'll have. I was in a camera store the other day, and they are basically not selling anything but mirrorless anymore. Okay. So we're all headed there. We're all going to have to learn it, but I do not know the answers to that really well.
One of our attendees, Jim, says there is no light leak with mirrorless.
Good.
Very good.
Good to know.
Let's see, we've got more. Someone asked, did you say that you used a hood? Because you can't use a filter in a hood, right? together?
Well, that's what we were just talking. I'm sorry. The hood would be the same as a shade, a lens hood.
Okay.
And you can use it depending on the size of the filter you have, and how your lens shade is made. So most of mine, I have the lens shade on when I'm using a polarizer, and I put my finger in to turn it. But not everybody can do that easily. So some people have to take it off, turn it, get it where you want it, and then put the hood on. It really varies. But when you're using the soft grads, the hard grads, you cannot use a lens shade with that, a lens hood. You have to somehow block the extraneous light from coming in with your hat or your hand or a friend.
And a couple of folks want to know, if you're going to start with some filters, is there one filter or a set of filters that they should start with?
Do you want to take that?
No, go ahead.
Well, I probably started with a 2-stop soft and hard and
Grad, neutral.
Grad-
I'm talking neutral density now.
grad neutral densities. And I think now if I was starting out, I might start with the 3, but the 2 isn't a bad place to start. And it's really nice to have both. As far as the other filters, as Susan said, we prefer the warming circular, and they have polarizers, and they have the LB warming circular polarizer. I think that's probably a great place to start with that one.
It's actually where I started with. My first polarizer was the Singh-Ray color combo, and I felt like I was getting 2 in 1, so I was getting my money's worth.
You got it. And as far as neutral densities, I think a 5-stop more slow on the full neutral density isn't a bad way to start and get used to it and all. And if you get one, you can always put a polarizer and stack it to it. If you get the regular size one, with the thin ones, you don't have the grooves on the outside, the threads to add something to it, but then you have less vignetting when you go to wide angle. So everything is a compromise with which ones you're going to get. I mean, your camera, your lens, they're all compromises. Do I want the heavy 2.8 or do I want the lighter f4? So it's just one constant game of compromises. But I think a 2-stop isn't a bad way to start, or a 3. And when you do it, you're still going to want the other one soon afterwards to go along with it. And you can put those together to get a 5-stop. So, and a lot of people are doing that when they come to a really bright situation. So it's not like the other one's just sitting in the bag, not being used.
Right.
In terms of the full neutral density, again, I started with the 5, and I really think it's a great way to start, because you've got 5 there, and you add a polarizer, and you've got 7, and 7 stops of light change. And with the variable is unbelievable filter, because you can turn it to where it's relatively clear, and you can still make your composition and focus and do all of that in there. But it's thick. Even the thinnest one is kind of thick and causes some vignetting when you're using real wide. And I tend to be using a lot of wide stuff on landscapes. So you have to learn to deal with it and figure out what your limitations are and how you're going to handle that. I hope that helps for starting out.
And then Linda wanted to know, what shutter speed do you use in general for purposeful, pleasing blur?
Wow, that is so independent. It's so dependent on how fast the movement is of whatever you're photographing. But I would say if it's a waterfall type of situation, or at the ocean and the waves are crashing on the rocks, somewhere between a 1/2 stop, 1/3 of a stop, 1/4 of a stop are pretty magical numbers. So it's a great question. I hope that helps you get started with doing that.
And then someone asked, do you experience any color shift using the Singh-Ray NDs?
I don't recognize a lot of color shifts. Some people say when you get into the really heavy duty dark ones, maybe you get a slight warming, but it's never been enough.
Never been an issue
It's
for us.
it's never turned into an issue, but we have known issues with other brands of filters where they're not consistent and where they do cause a color shift. So for us, if there's any minor tweak, we do use Lightroom, and it might be a 1 millimeter slide or 2 millimeter slide of the slider to correct for it. Never enough to worry about, think about, or spend any time about.
And then how much are you using filters that screw on versus the rectangular ones that fit in frames?
Well, they all screw on except for the
Grad.
soft grad, hard grad, and those are the ones. So we pretty much are using screw-on filters most of the time.
And do you ever use an IR filter?
You know, we have a dedicated IR camera, and Singh-Ray makes a filter for doing that, but I'm not familiar with it. I just don't know much about it at all.
I know we did a webinar about infrared. If you go to singray.com/webinars, you should be able to find a recording. I'm not sure which month, but we did do a webinar about IR all by itself.
Good.
And then someone wanted to know, when did you guys get into full-time photography, and do you print your work?
Well, when did we get into full-time photography? Probably 20, 25 years ago. And actually, to be honest, we print for ourselves, or we also not only do landscapes and travel photography, we photograph events and people portraits. So we will print those, we kind of print on demand. We do not go to shows and or have a gallery. That's all, we have just kind of geared ourselves and dedicated ourselves towards leading workshops and teaching people. So anybody loves one of our images, yes, we're very happy to print, and we print for ourselves, but we don't have them hanging in a gallery, or we haven't, where we've gone ahead and printed and have kind of a stockpile of prints.
So we have friends that do all that, and they've got the stockpile, but I don't know, to keep them in good condition and to be taking
Without
them.
being shelved.
I mean, you have to take them to a gallery or a show or a contest. You have to take them on a certain day at a certain time. You got to pick them up on a certain day at a certain time. Just never been our lifestyle.
That hasn't worked for us.
So we do print when somebody wants a print, and we have really great lab that we use for doing that. So we come up with some beautiful things, but we don't just do that every day.
And do you like the magnetic holders versus the screw-on holders?
So we only have the screw-on holders, and I believe that Singh-Ray more recently has a magnetic type, and I would love to know more about it, but I don't really know.
No experience with it.
And I got a note from my team members here that the infrared webinar was George Wilson, part 1 in March and part 2 in April, guessing 2020.
Okay.
And I would love to get one of those infrared filters, because I don't always want to be carrying my second camera with me.
Yeah.
So it would be so much nicer to have a filter in my pouch instead of trying to have another camera with another battery that I have to charge and another card that I got to have in there. So yeah, we would love to learn about that, but we don't know yet.
And then back to the prints. Do you have a lab that you use that you like to recommend?
Well, we only use one lab pretty much for many, many years, and they have support and a customer service much like Singh-Ray. So that's why we use them, and that's Bay Photo, and they're in California.
Santa Cruz, California.
Great job. This has been a wonderful review of so many of our filters. This has been really great.
Thank you.
I think we're done with the questions. So thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. And like I said, it's just a wonderful back to basics sort of webinar. And this has been, I've enjoyed it.
Well, great.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you for your help too. Great.
All right. Stay safe, everyone, and
Thank
enjoy
you everyone
shooting.
for joining us.
And the one thing I want to say before we hang up
Yeah.
is that you must always remember that when we all are taking pictures and doing it, you're doing it for yourself. So you want to please yourself and always maintain the joy of taking photos because it's a wonderful thing to do. And don't look for criticism. Just remember how much you enjoy it and always get your camera and get out with your camera.
Great points. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Have a good
Bye-bye.
night.